the Great Resignation turning out to be the Great Regret. This is an article that was featured in The Guardian just a short while back, and we wanted to share our thoughts on this article today. So, Devin, you are our special co-host today. We are so excited to have you here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this article. Let's get going.
Yes, absolutely. First, thank you for having me back. Super excited to be here. For my perspective, I'm on the talent acquisition side, and I am seeing this happen a lot. Just personally, I'm even seeing candidates that I've placed in the past a couple years ago, or even within the past year, before I was a part of the Jumpstart team, even come back to me saying, "Hey, I'm having a little bit of regret here, just from leaving my position. I was in it for, hey, maybe a different compensation structure, or I was led to believe something different." And that's even something that they mentioned in The Guardian, of about 40% of candidates say that they don't feel valued in their new roles since they have left. And that was something that a lot of the candidates that I've talked to, even in the last 6 months that are looking for new roles now, are expressing to me too. So Summer, I know you're also on the other side of the Mississippi. So I want to definitely know what you're seeing on your side of the house as well.
Well, I definitely would say, Devin, it's quite consistent across the board. I think there's so many different factors that contributed to this environment. But when I'm talking to candidates, and we're also still having state interviews with those that remain at the company, what we're finding is that those individuals that are leaving, in many cases, are leaving for more money. As you know, if you stay at a company, typically the average increase might be maybe around 3, 4, 5% as an annual increase. But right now, individuals can leave and get a 10 plus salary increase. And so they're being lured by this money. And in many cases, just a promise of a better overall opportunity. And the saying, Devin, the grass isn't greener on the other side. I think, the stats in this article are definitely saying that, that's definitely the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm even seeing some candidates that thought they were leaving for one position, and now they're in the seat and discover that it's a completely different position than they thought. And now we're coming across the level of inflation, and now money is not solving their problems. They're thinking they're going to enjoy these roles, and money's not going to fix that.
Well, I think we can all agree that, achieving a higher level of earning is definitely attractive to everybody, but that it is important that you're also happy in your company and you're happy in the position, because, if you're earning the level of pay that you once set out to earn, and then you're just unhappy, like there's still a lot, there's still a lot to uh, accomplish there. And from my perspective, I think part of what has happened is that the new climate of recruiting, which, I'm sure as you can speak to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, has definitely changed. The pace in which candidates are moving through the recruiting cycle is at a frenzied pace. Whereas before, companies used to be a little slower, a little more methodical. And I think that part of what we're seeing is like this rush to get candidates through. And in some cases, I wouldn't go so far as to say like desperation to fill positions, but just the absolute need that some companies are overselling their company, their culture, they're overselling the position in itself. And as you mentioned, these team members get in the company and, maybe they don't feel valued, but, there's also the other aspect of like, hey, this is not what I was expecting. This is not the position that I was sold, if you will. So Devin, what are you seeing in that space, and kind of what are your thoughts on like how we got here, and what are you seeing on your side?
Yes, I am absolutely seeing in the entire process of recruiting, especially for small businesses, trying to stay competitive, we are having to move quickly in comparison to where we were even 6 months ago or even 3 months ago. Some candidates are falling off in the time that we set up a screen till the time that the screen even happens, or even between the screen and a first interview. because they're taking offers or deciding to pivot a different direction or whatever that may be. And sometimes that span is maybe 2 days, if that. So within a span of 48 hours, candidates are making a decision or even accepting an offer with another organization and moving really quickly. So having that decision and having to move very quickly, and especially for a small business, having to be able to remain competitive in that space too, is definitely a part of that as well. So, I mean, even just another study that was done, like 72% of the study of these, 2,500 workers that they took a chunk of, they had surprise regret with these no organization. 72% had surprise regret, saying it was very different from what they were led to believe from when they started. Like, imagine almost 3/4 of your organization being surprised of what they thought the role was going to be. That is 3/4 of your organization that could be thinking of going elsewhere or could be thinking of going back to their old organization in general, of that you might have brought in, or just expanding in general.
That's a really frightening number. And as you were sharing it, I was just starting to think of, oh my gosh, like that's such a huge number. I can't help but feel like, the decisions that we made at that point in time, to hire individuals, and I'm speaking like in the voice of like organizations, like those decisions that were made obviously were based on a need, but in this, kind of haste to hire, now I think, this whole phase of what's being coined the Great Regret, we're going to see kind of another big cycle of turnover and movement in the talent acquisition space. And, if I was to think of the advice that we would provide to any of our consulting clients, it's that the approach that they took perhaps during this last year and a half, we need to look at it differently, because if 72% are feeling like they're not the right fit, we definitely missed something. I don't really want to put you on the spot, but I would definitely be curious to hear your thoughts on, knowing that there are this many team members in positions that, aren't quite, aren't totally fulfilled, and that there's likely this other cycle of turnover coming. Like, what are some things that you think companies might want to be doing a little bit differently in the recruiting process to try to avoid that happening again?
Yes. One of the things that comes directly to mind for me is being truthful and being very intentional. I get the idea of like, hey, we need some people in our seats, and we need to be able to fulfill the work that we need to do. But at the same time, we need to make sure we're being very real with where we are and what we're selling to our potential candidates. Because as much as we need people in the door, we need to make sure that they're going to be a long-term fit. And by being intentional and being truthful about that, we need to make sure that like they're going to be a good fit for us and we're a good fit for them. And I think that's going to, work out in everyone's favor, regardless if that's going to extend someone staying, a week in the recruiting process. That'll go a long way. And then the other thing that definitely comes to mind, if we did bring in a new hire, or even just hired a group recently, maybe look into doing some stay interviews, getting a third party like Jumpstart to kind of help out with some of those things, to really just see like, what about your role aren't you fulfilled about? What are you passionate about? What about your role would you change? That way we could kind of get ahead of those things. So you're not feeling that 72% in your organization that might not feel unfulfilled. That way we can get ahead of that, and really make sure that you're not stuck in a very scary spot once all these people might be thinking of deciding to change direction.
Absolutely. And I know that we typically save our consultants corner for where we talk about, examples of what we're seeing on the consulting side, but I can't help but tie this into a recent conversation that was had with one of our clients who was experiencing some larger than historical patterns of turnover, despite growing and being quite successful and what I would consider an employer of choice. So, when I look at a company like them who has a lot of positives going for them, and even they are experiencing a higher than usual level of turnover, it's really eye-opening. And some of the conversations that we've been having together in terms of how to get in front of exactly what we're talking about in this organization is to take a multi-pronged approach to communicating with team members. And so some of the things that we discussed are, first, leadership addressing kind of the elephant in the room, because you can't ignore the fear that the team members who remain may have in regards to, well, why are people leaving? What do they know that we don't know? If everything else seems great, then like what don't we know? So there's kind of that fear that needs to be addressed. And then also some of the turnover in kind of that fear-based space being, we're talking about potentially heading into a recession, and team members fearing like, okay, well, if we've been growing, and a recession is potentially on the horizon, what does that mean in terms of potential staff reductions? So in other words, leadership having conversations to address some of that fear just head on in regards to what they know today. And, kind of really just putting it out there so that it doesn't leave, questions in that space of fear, which we know oftentimes people will just do what they think is right, be proactive, and seek another job if they feel like their job may be potentially at risk. And kind of the second component to that is ensuring that anybody who is a people manager within the organization is highly engaged and reaching into their team and finding out how their team members are doing. And this isn't just a, hey, regular weekly check-in, how are you on your project? It's let's talk a little bit deeper about, how are things outside of work? Is there anything that work can do differently to help support you? What is it that feels like it's missing in your current opportunity? And then getting to, kind of the nuts and bolts of the conversation, which is, and this may be a hard conversation for some, like, have you recently thought about leaving the company in the foreseeable future? And if you have that trust with your team, then hopefully they'll come forward and say, yeah, actually, like I had a recruiter reach out to me, and maybe I didn't pursue it at that time, but more recently I've been thinking, I might be open to an opportunity. And having those honest conversations to get to the root of what's prompting your team to leave, if you can get in front of them, then I think that you will have a better chance of reducing your turnover and maybe even starting to whittle down some of those frightening numbers that we saw, of folks that recently made a leap, not having so much regret. And for those of you who might want to read the full article, it is in The Guardian. It's called "Turns Out the Great Resignation May Be Followed by the Great Regret" by Gene Marks.